Vandeham Shri Guru Shikita Padagamanam Sri Guru and Vaishnavamshcha Shri Rupam Shagarajatam Shahagana Raganatam Vitam Shajivam Sadvaitam Shavadutam Parijana Shaitam Vishnu Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Shahagana Galita Shivishapam Mantra Guru Jokta Shiva Guru Ganta Charane Agi Koriya Bundam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Dinamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Prachani Nirvishesha Shundari Prashtapta Deshakam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Se Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Shri Guru Bhakti Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Bhai Chaitanya Nitai Shutrida Vishasha Gauri Vishaya Chariya Shigroshe Majaya Mukhe Polo Hari Hari Mukhe Polo Hari Hari Vishaya Chariya Shigroshe Majaya Mukhe Polo Hari Hari Pashupakijun Pashana Vedare Shunijara Gunagata Pashupakijun Shunijara Gunagata Shamshadamoji Rohire Poriya Shipare Nahilo Pasha Shipare Nahilo Appanakaram Bunjaye Shamanam Kahe Lochana Dasha Kahe Lochana Dasha Parama Koduna Pohudu Ijana Nitai Gaura Chandra Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Nama Krishna Yadhavaya Namaha, Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan, Hare Krishna Yadavaya Namaha. Gopal Govinda Dam Shri Madhusudan. Jaya Nitai Gauranga Joy Nitai Gauranga. Jaya Nitai Gauranga Gaurahari. Nitai Gauranga Nitai Gauranga. Jaya Nitai Gauranga Gaurahari. Jaya Nitai Gauranga Jaya Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga Gaurahari. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai. Oh Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol. Jayam Vishnu Padmanamhansa Puribhajagacharya Shatala Sushanachala Bhajanara Vinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON Registered Acharya Shri Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Kuri Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. Shri Nitai Gaura Siddhanath Pramanam Hari Hari Bol. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhva Lila, Chapter 19, Text 1. Vrindavanyam Rashikeli Bhartam Kalena Uttam Nija Shakti Mukta Shanchar Charupe Byatanot Punasha Prabhu Vidho Pragiva Loka Shrishtim Vrindavaniyam Rashakeli Bhartam Kalena Luptam Nija Shakti Mukta Shanchar Charupe Byatanat Punasha Prabhu Vidho Pragiva Loka Sristhim. Before the creation of the cosmic manifestation, the Lord enlightened. Chant? Like to chant? Vrindavaniyam Rashakeli Bhartam means the Vrindavaniyam Rashakeli, the descriptions, the talks about the pastimes of Sri Krishna. Kalena Luptam Nija Shakti, Kalena Luptam, which had become in the course of time lost. Nija Shakti Mukta, his personal potencies. Before the creation of the cosmic manifestation, the Lord enlightened the heart of Lord Brahma with details of the creation manifested Vedic knowledge. In the same way, the Lord, being anxious to revive the Vrindavan pastimes of Lord Krishna, impregnated the heart of Rupa Goswami with spiritual potency. And by this potency, Srila Rupa Goswami could revive the activities of Krishna in Vrindavan, activities almost lost to memory. In this way, he spread Krishna consciousness throughout the world. Srila Prabhupada ki. There's no purport to that verse. After the meeting in Ramkelli, of course, you can imagine how surcharged with spiritual potency Rupa and Sanatan were. And quickly they began planning on how to extricate themselves from their engagement in the government of Nawab Hussain Shah and be able to surrender themselves fully to the lotus feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and give their lives to furthering his mission. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we heard he went to Kanai-Natasala and then returned and made his journey back to Jagannath Puri. And then upon arriving in Jagannath Puri, perhaps at least 6 weeks later, he was describing to Gadadhar Pandit the impact that the meeting with Rupa and Sanatan had on him. It broke his heart. The humility of Rupa and Sanatan. We were discussing yesterday, I didn't finish the verse, but Chaktva, no, is Nidra ahara viharikaji vijito. They completely lost interest in eating and sleeping. Nidra aha viharikaji, recreation, vijito. They completely conquered over. Atanta dino. Atanta dino. Atanta means unending. Atanta dino. There's unlimited humility. Dino. Dainato. Unlimited, even though they were so qualified in every Mahajogis. Great learned scholars, great devotees, but atanta dino, they actually considered themselves so unqualified, and that attracted Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's heart so much. He was describing their qualities, glorifying his devotees when he returned to Jagannath Puri. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu left Ramkeli, and then Rupa Goswami, he sent 2 Brahmins to Jagannath Puri. That would have taken them. Perhaps they traveled quickly. Perhaps, I don't know, horseback. I don't know. You get horses. Actually, they could take the boat. Mahaprabhu walking, but you can take the boat. A boat from Gaur all the way to Bay of Bengal, and perhaps even all the way to Puri. You take boat because the Ganga current is coming down. So that was the Ma Ganga. She was the main source of communication and transport through all of North and East India. So take boat. One time I remember Mahavishnu Swami, they took a boat from Mayapur to Puri. A raft, not a boat, a raft. Yes, floating down the Ganga and down to the ocean all the way to Puri. A raft. You remember that? It was about 15 years ago. Mahavishnu Swami Maharaj is always looking for pioneering, exciting spiritual adventures. And a raft. I'm serious. So then the Brahmins, they informed Rupa Goswami that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu already left for Vrindavan via Jarikan forest. And that's a whole another wonderful pastime, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu delivering the tigers, the elephants. We were discussing last night how he was enjoying being alone in the solitary forest, bathing in the rivers, and eating the fresh vegetables growing in the jungle. So then Rupa Goswami, hearing this news, he immediately left, gave up his engagement with the Nawab's government. Prabhupada describes he collected all of his riches, put them in the boat. Half he gave to the Vaishnava Brahmins, and 1/4 he sent back to Joshore, Bangladesh, where birthplace, sent back in a boat, Ma Ganga and then Padma River into Bangladesh. And he left with his other brother Anupam. There's 3 brothers, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Sri Ballabh. There's 3 brothers. At that time his name was Anupam. So Rupa Goswami and Anupam, they left and traveled along the banks of the Ganga, heading for Vrindavan. We can assume, although it's not discussed, and I'm trying to get confirmation from different great advanced Vaishnavas, but as yet we haven't received, but we can assume that Rupa and Sanatan were thinking that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would go to Vrindavan and stay there. And therefore they would all be together in Vrindavan. Perhaps, or perhaps not, but in any case, Vrindavan was the destination. Mahaprabhu was going to Vrindavan, so Rupa Goswami and Anupam, they left for Vrindavan. And as it so happens, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu arrived in Vrindavan, and he remained there for about 12 days. And that's a beautiful description in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's visit to Sri Vrindavan Dham. Many fascinating pastimes are performed. Actually, Balabhadra Bhattacharya and his assistant, they actually brought Chaitanya Mahaprabhu out of Vrindavan because his ecstasy was becoming uncontainable. His ecstasy increased 1,000 times when he was on the road to Mathura. And when he was reaching Vrindavan, 10,000 times. Can you imagine? 10,000 times more multiplied his ecstatic love of God. In Vrindavan, it was uncontainable. So they decided to bring Chaitanya Mahaprabhu out of Vrindavan after a short time. So Mahaprabhu went to Vrindavan, and then again he's coming back. Again he comes back to the banks of Ma Ganga, and he's in Prayag. And Prabhupada begins to describe Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's arrival in Prayag, his pastimes in Prayag, and at that time Rupa and Anupam, they had arrived. They were expecting to go to Vrindavan, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had already left Vrindavan and he was returning on the banks of the Ganga, and so they saw him in Prayag. And Prabhupada, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he begins to describe Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's preaching activities in Prayag. Prabhu chalayachin bindu madhav darshane lokalok aishe Prabhu milone Shishi Radha Madhav ki Nitai Gaushundor ki Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki. Again, loka means millions and millions, hundreds of millions actually, 10 million. Lok is 10, lakh. No, loka means 100, means 100,000, 100,000. That's millions and millions of people that gathered. Were with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, millions. Kehu Konde, Kehu Hashe, Kehu Nache Gai. We're actually reading from chapter 20, chapter 19. What's that? Text 40, text 35, text 40, text 30. Yeah. Text 38 of chapter 19. Kehu Kande, some were crying. Kehu Hashe, some were laughing. Kehu Nache, some were dancing. Gai, some were singing. Krishna Krishna Bole, Kehu Gad Gada Jai. Krishna Krishna Bole, they were chanting the name of Krishna. Some were rolling on the ground. Some are rolling on the ground. It's very extraordinary to consider. This is the Prabhupada has, we mentioned yesterday, Prabhupada has summarized the Madhva Lila Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita in the book Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. He summarized the principle, the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Rupa Goswami, to Sanatana Goswami, to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, to Prakashananda Saraswati, to Ramananda Roy. All the incidents in the Madhva Lila where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's philosophy is described, imparted. So Prabhupada, just as he wrote the Krishna book, Prabhupada was considering that perhaps I may not complete Srimad Bhagavatam. So after completing first canto in India, in Vrindavan, published in Delhi, the first canto, you have copies of that in Prabhupada's rooms in Juhu. So those books were published. Prabhupada brought those books with him to the United States. He was personally distributing those books. Brahmananda Prabhu tells a story that he gave Prabhupada was selling those books in Second Avenue classes. After the class, Prabhupada would sell those books. And it's like Prabhupada's he's speaking, and his set of his Bhagavatams, published Bhagavatams. Even when they went to first see the storefront, Second Avenue, with Mukunda and Prabhupada, and they're meeting the landlord, and Prabhupada had an assistant with the books. I've told that story, amazing story. And Prabhupada begins to introduce, and then wondering what happened, and Prabhupada immediately takes over, negotiating. And he says, yes, these boys, they're members of my institute, and members receive the books, and Prabhupada looks at the servant and give the books. The servant hands the books to the gentleman. And he's looking, Prabhupada's own books, published books. It's not like nowadays, anyone can publish books with your computer, but in those days, publishing books meant you're a published author. Looking at the books, and Prabhupada saying that membership is $21 a month. Mukunda and they are looking, well, members? Members are $20 a month. And Prabhupada was saying that Prabhupada was saying, we'll skip the first month's membership fees, and we'll pay $160 a month for the rooms. And it completely took over the situation and closed the deal for both the storefront and the apartment upstairs. Prabhupada ki. So the books, Brahmananda tells the story that he gave donation. I think it was $500, all of his savings. He gave to Prabhupada $500. And he's sitting, and Prabhupada graciously accepts the donation. That's a significant donation 50 years ago, $500, and and all of his savings. And then he says, Prabhupada, can I have the set of the books? And Prabhupada says, certainly. Prabhupada takes the books, hands him the books, and says, $25. Prabhupada ki. Ramananda Prabhu was crying when he was telling that story. I heard him in Vrindavan tell that story. How Prabhupada delivered him. So after arriving in the United States with those Bhagavatams, Prabhupada carried on. He was working on his manuscript Bhagavad Gita, which was stolen. Bhagavad Gita, the first version of Bhagavad Gita as it is was stolen. Maybe one day someone will come up, I have the manuscript. No, ISKCON, revolution in ISKCON, everyone begins studying Prabhupada's first version of the Bhagavad Gita as it is. Who knows what will happen? Of course there'll be examination to test its authenticity, etc. So then Prabhupada was writing other books. He wrote the next one was Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and Nectar of Devotion, and Krishna book. I think Teachings of Lord Chaitanya was even before Krishna book. So Prabhupada was considering he may not complete the whole Bhagavatam, so therefore he wrote 10th Canto Summary, Krishna book. And in a similar way, Prabhupada wanted to immediately impart the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to the Western world. Subsequently, Prabhupada translated the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita. But at that time, Prabhupada felt that he summarized Madhya Lila in the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. But what's very interesting is that his summary of the Madhya Lila, it doesn't begin in the beginning of Madhya Lila. In the beginning of Madhya Lila, Mahaprabhu is traveling from Puri, and then Sakshi Gopal and Ramuna, and then first his arrival in Puri, deliverance of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. That's first. But Prabhupada doesn't discuss that first. Rather, he goes to Rupa Shiksha. The teachings of Lord Chaitanya, it begins with Rupa Shiksha. It doesn't begin in the beginning of Madhya Lila. It doesn't begin with Sarvabhauma, instructions to Sarvabhauma. It doesn't even begin in the beginning of the 19th chapter. It begins in the middle of the 19th chapter. Prabhupada's teachings of Lord Chaitanya begins just at this moment when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is approaching the temple of Bindu Madhav in Prayag, and he's surrounded by millions of people. Some are laughing, some are dancing, some are crying, some are rolling on the ground. So it is not some random, I'll just start here. Prabhupada strategically selected that particular incident to introduce Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the Western world. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is a climactic incident of climactic preaching. He's completely, indiscriminately overwhelmed, intoxicated with love of Godhead, completely unaware of external environment, and attracting millions of people who are completely overwhelmed with love of Godhead. And in that way, Prabhupada introduces Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the Western world. That is extraordinary. Keho kande, keho hashe, keho nache gai. Some are crying, some are laughing, some are rolling on the ground. Krishna, Krishna, bole keho gad gara jai. Ganga, Jamuna, Prayag, Narayala, Dubaite. There was never a flood in Prayag. Ganga, Jamuna, Prayag, Narayala, Dubai. It never flooded. Prabhu, Dubai, lo Krishna Prime Bandate. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he flooded Prayag with the flood of love of Godhead. Here they're rolling on the ground. People are rolling on the ground. One time in the class I inquired from His Holiness Jaipataka Swami Maharaj, can devotees roll on the ground in the kirtan? Because it's described so many times, they're rolling on the ground. I said, can devotees roll on the ground in the kirtan? His Holiness, his response, it was simultaneously humorous and full of instruction. He said that actually devotees, they try to restrain their ecstatic symptoms. And he was explaining that you can roll on the ground if you cannot control yourself. In other words, if you're thinking, the kirtan's so nice, dancing, maybe I'll roll on the ground. No, you can't do that. But if you cannot stop yourself from rolling on the ground, then you can roll on the ground. If you cannot stop yourself. Prema beshe nache Prabhu hari done kori prema beshe. overwhelmed with love of God. Nache Prabhu. Hari Doni Kori, dancing and chanting Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Udvabahu Kori Bolo Hari Hari. With his arms raised, he's chanting Hari Bolo Hari Hari. He's asking everyone to chant Hari Hari. Prabhu Mahima Deki Log Chamatkar. Everyone was astonished, Chamatkar. They were completely astonished to Prabhu Mahima, seeing the wonderful activities. Prabhu Mahima Deki Log Chamatkar Prayag Prabhu Lila Nari Barniba. No one can describe. It's impossible to describe the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Prayag. However, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami and Srila Prabhupada's translation are very beautifully describing. So Rupa and Anupam, they were seeing this. And they were seeing this. Kaviraj Goswami, he's describing what Rupa and Anupam saw. But they didn't, at that time, they didn't go immediately to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because the crowd, there's a huge crowd. So they didn't approach him at that time. Subsequently, Mahaprabhu was residing there, and he was residing in the house of a South Indian Brahmin, and he was taking prasadam. And then Rupa and Anupam, they came to that place. And falling down in front of the lotus feet of the Lord, paying obeisances, they got up chanting various verses in glorification of the Lord. Nana shlok puri ute pore babar. Nana shlok puri. They're getting up and they're chanting various verses glorifying the Lord, and again falling down paying obeisances. Prabhu deki premabeshe hoilo duhar. Prabhu deki, seeing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, premabesh, they're overwhelmed with love of Godhead. These two brothers. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he sees Rupa and Anupam. Sri Rupe Dekiya Prabhur Prashanna Hoilomon. He became very pleased seeing Rupa and Sanatan. Uto Rup Aishe Bolila Bochan, and he said, get up. And he was very pleased to see them. So it's a reciprocal relationship. The devotee feels great pleasure seeing the acharya and taking the darshan. Darshan pavitra hoye tomar, seeing. And similarly, the great Vaishnavas, he takes great pleasure in seeing the devotees. So we should present ourselves just like we come to see the Lord in the temple. We take darshan of the Lord, and the Lord likes to see the devotees dancing in the kirtan and offering their respects and offering their prayers. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he began to quote verses. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began to quote verses glorifying the devotees. The Rupa and Anupam are quoting verses glorifying the Lord, and the Lord is quoting verses. Name bhaktas chaturvedi mad bhakta swapa chapriyaha tasmai deyam tatograham shacha puja jatahi aham. That my devotee, even though he's born in the family of dog eaters, swapacha, he's more dear to me than the chaturvedi who's not my devotee. The chaturvedi scholar who's not my devotee is not as dear to me as the devotee who's even born in the family of dog eaters. Tasmai dhyayam. Everything should be offered to that person. Tato grayam, whatever that person offers should be accepted. Be careful to accept any gift offered by a Vaishnava. Even you don't require it. Don't say, oh, no. Vaishnava offers a gift, you accept that. And then you can distribute. But tato grayam, anything offered by a Vaishnava should be received. Sometimes you see Prabhupada, he's getting out of the vehicle, he's walking to the door, of the front door of the temple, and devotees are offering many gifts, flower, bouquets, some other gifts, parcels, different things. Prabhupada he's just accepting everything. His arms are full. And then as he's walking, he's distributing, he's giving, he's distributing. Yesterday, Hriday Yagya Prabhu, he came to my room with a big box of mangoes. Big box of mangoes. Today they have to be honored. I said, put in the fridge. He said, no. So I will offer, after class, I will do puja. I will offer those mangoes, a big box of mangoes. Perhaps you may be fortunate at prasadam time to receive a morsel of those mangoes. I cannot eat everything. But I didn't say, oh, how can I eat so much mangoes? I gracefully accepted. I'll offer it and then we'll distribute. Sacha puja chatahi aham. He is as worshipable as I am. A shlok 48. Duha Koile Alingon, saying this, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu embraced the two brothers. Kripate Duha Matai Daryela Charon. And showing them mercy, he placed his lotus feet on their heads. And folding their hands, the two brothers, they began to offer prayers to the Lord. And this prayer by Srila Rupa Goswami is a very famous prayer, and Prabhupada has included this prayer in the set of prayers that we chant when we're offering bhoga. Namo Maha Bharannaya Krishna Prema Pradaya De Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauda Tushay Namaha. He is Sri Krishna Chaitanya, is Krishna himself. He has assumed the fair complexion of Chaitanya. And Chaitanya, he is known as Gauranga, the golden one, the most munificent incarnation of Krishna, because he's distributing love of Krishna. So then they're discussing about Sanatana Goswami. And Rupa Goswami is requesting Mahaprabhu to bestow his mercy upon Sanatana Goswami, and Mahaprabhu says that Sanatana Goswami has already been released from captivity. That is described in the next chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita, how Sanatana Goswami was able to extricate himself from the captivity of the Nawabhushan Shah. If we're fortunate sometime to travel to Ramkeli and Gold, it's just a few hours train ride from Navadip, and we can describe that pastime in full of Sanatana Goswami dealing with the jail keeper and all of those places you can see. So at that time in Prayag, residing was a great Vaishnava named Balaba Bhatta, who subsequently is the Acharya of the Pushti Marg, and Prabhupada actually mentions that this sampradaya is predominantly seen in Vrindavan and Mumbai. So Balabhacharya was there, and then he came. Yeah, Prabhupada says, Balabhacharya Sampradaya. This Sampradaya has great influence in Vrindavan, near Gokul, and in Mumbai. So Balabhacharya, he came to see the Lord, and he offers his obeisances to the Lord. And then, seeing Balabhacharya, remember the circumstances of Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Anupam. We discussed that they never entered the temple of Lord Jagannath, considering themselves fallen and rejected from the Brahminical society. They never entered the Jagannath temple. So this Balabhacharya, he was a great Vaishnava Brahmin. And seeing him, Rupa and Anupam, they went a distance away so that they wouldn't pollute him. They walked away. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's seeing this, and he's testing. He's testing. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is testing Balabhacharya, and he says, don't touch those men. They are asprishya, they are untouchable. And Prabhupada's commenting. Mahaprabhu is saying, you are an experienced performer of many sacrifices and a member of the aristocracy. Prabhupada's commenting that generally Brahmins are puffed up with false prestige, because they belong to the aristocracy and perform many Vedic sacrifices. In South India especially, the fastidious position is most prominent. At any rate, this was the case 500 years ago. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu started a revolution against Brahminical system, against this Brahminical system of this pride and this other abuse. A revolution against that by the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. Because by the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, regardless of one's social position, Dina hina jota chilo Hari name udharilo. Dina hina jota chilo means as degraded as you can possibly be. Dina hina jota chilo, as degraded as you can possibly become. Hari name udharilo, the holy name will deliver you. Tashaki Jagai Madhai, the evidence, Jagai and Madhai, whose sins were so innumerable that Yamaraj had to have a whole special department exclusively trying to keep up accounting the sins of Jagai and Madhai. Hundreds of clerks working under Chitragupta just to keep up with all of the sins of Jagai and Madhai. They were exhausted. There's a story there. There's a story. Anyway, we won't get into that today. After the deliverance of Jagai and Madhai, and the demigods are all returning to the heavenly abode, and Yamaraj is on his chariot, he falls unconscious. He's asking Chitragupta, how much sin was removed by Gaudhari in that Leela? And Chitragupta, I'll get the accounts. And he begins at hundreds of clerks working non-stop, overtime, just to keep up with it. All finished. Yamaraj fell unconscious. Just Sri Chaitanya Doya, Koraho Bichar. Just try to understand the mercy of Chaitanya. Sri Chaitanya Doya, Koraho Bichar. Just try to estimate, evaluate the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Bichar kore chitte pabe chamatkar. If you examine in your heart, you'll become astonished. And Prabhupada comments now about the current head of the Vallabha Sampradaya named Dikshita Maharaj. This is 50 years ago, so perhaps his disciples are now head. But Prabhupada saying that whenever we meet this learned Brahmin, he highly praises the activities of the Hare Krishna movement. He is a life member of our society. Perhaps he was made a life member in Juhu. He perhaps was made a life member by Sridhar Swami or Giriraj Swami in Juhu. He accepts our society and considers its members bona fide devotees of Lord Vishnu. So Ballabhacharya, he's seeing that Rupa and Anupam, they're there and they're in great humility, they're going in the distance, and they're constantly chanting the holy name, constantly chanting, falling on the ground, paying obeisances, constantly chanting the holy name. And Ballabhacharya says, "Oh Goshai, how is it possible that we could consider these men untouchable when from their lips the holy name of the Lord is constantly being chanted?" And then Ballabhacharya quotes verses. This section is such important verses glorifying the Vaishnav from lower caste. Ballabhacharya, he quotes from the teachings of Devahuti, the prayers of Devahuti to Kapil Muni, 3rd canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. Ahopada. This verse is quoted 3 times in the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. We're assuming all of the august Bhakti Shastri graduates in this learned assembly know this verse. Yes, Ahobata swapacho to gariyam yajivagre bhatite namatubhyam te pustapaste juhuvu shashnuvaya brahmanachu namagrinanti yete. Ballabhacharya is explaining that, how glorious! Ahobata swapacha are those who are born in a family of dog eaters, who are jibagre bhatite namatubhyam, chanting your holy name. Jibagre means that not even serious chanting. Jibagre means, agra means a beginning of chanting, or just on the tip of their tongue. Jibagre, on the tip of their tongue, or just beginning to chant. So a little chanting of the holy name. For the person born in the family of dog eaters, if he a little chants the holy name, then he becomes Tepur stapas te juhuvu shashnu arya. He becomes more exalted than the Brahmins. It's considered just by chanting, even on the tip of the tongue, a little chanting. One has performed all the austerities. Juhuvu. One has performed all of the rituals of the Vedic scriptures. Shashnu. He's traveled to all the holy places and taken bath there. Arya Brahmana has developed all the good qualities of the Aryan civilization. Brahmanachu studied all the Vedas. Namagrinanti. Just by accepting your name. Just by chanting the holy name, regardless of one's birth, one has acquired the results of studying all the Vedas, traveling to all the holy places, taking bath and performing all the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies. Therefore, aho, how glorious are those who are chanting the holy name, even if born in a low family. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was very enlivened hearing Ballabhacharya quote these verses, glorifying the Vaishnava regardless of his birth and ethnic background. And being enlivened, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he quotes verses. He begins quoting verses. This whole Leela is just everyone's just quoting verses. This is how Vaishnavas interact. Katayantas chamam nityam. Katayantas chamam nityam, always describing my qualities, describing my activities, repeating my instructions. Katayantas chamam nityam tushanti cha, ramanti cha. And this way they enjoy satisfaction and pleasure. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quotes some Hari Bhakti Shuddhodaya. Bhagavad Bhakti Hinasha Jati Shastram Japashtapaha. That without devotion to the Lord, one's birth, Jati Shastram Japatapaha, one's birth, one's learning, one's prayer, japa tapaha, one's austerity, apranayasha dehasha mandanam lokaranjanam, are just like decoration on a dead body. Fortunately, we have a chota ekta kutir, we have a little apartment just on the Janabir Tire, on the banks of Ganga. Have a little apartment. Such a treasure. We have a little apartment just on the banks of Ganga. Even Mahadev himself desires to reside on the banks of Ganga and worship Gauranga. Mayarapur anturbage janabirtide Gauranga bhajibo ami rohira kutide. Mayapur anturbage, deep within Mayapur Dam, janabirtide, on the banks of Ganga. Gauranga bhajibo ami. I will worship Gauranga. I will chant Gauranga, Gauranga. Rohira Kutire, living in a cottage. Mahadev, Shiva, he describes this in Satyajuga to Simantini Devi, Parvati Devi. He's describing this. So we have a little cottage on the banks of Ganga, and oftentimes you see people then in procession, they're on the bank, they're going to the Shashan Ghat. They're chanting Hari Bol, Hari Bol with a departed person, and that body is all decorated. It's all decorated. Flower garland and decorated. Even in the Western culture, it's a big business. The undertakers. It's a big business. Yes, the funeral. They make the wooden box. It's very costly. Thousands of dollars, lakhs and lakhs of rupees. The wooden box. Inside is padding. Inside is padding. You can get thick, all different, and the suit. The dead body is dressed in a suit, and all of these things, and people come and look. So it's looks so beautiful. Are you thinking that it's not? No one's thinking, oh, it's so beautiful. You're not keeping. This thing is not a beautiful thing. But mandanam lokaranjanam, just to give some relief to the people in general, a body is decorated in that way. And Mahaprabhu is explaining that these assets, jati shastram japa tapaha, one's birth, shastram one's learning, japa one's prayer, tapaha one's austerity. They're just like those flowers on a dead body, if one is not a devotee of Krishna. So Ballabhacharya, he was residing on the other side of Ganga in Prayag, and then the whole party, they journeyed to the residence of Ballabhacharya, so they were crossing the Ganga at that time. Now, they got into a boat, and as they were crossing, the blackish, when Goshandor, when he saw the blackish color of the Ganga in Prayag, where Jamuna is Tribeni Triveni Prayag. Who's bathed there? Who's been to Prayag and taken bath there? I mean, I was expecting most of you have done that. Well, we're fortunate to have visited Prayag and taken bath in Triveni. It's a very wonderful place, very wonderful. There is Aditya Jogi, the chief minister, he has ashram there. He has ashram, and constantly you can hear Bhagavad Gita as you're taking bath there. And the Bindu Madhav temple is just not far from that place. And also you can go a little further and you can go to Rupa Gaudiya Mott, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where Srila Prabhupada received first and second initiation from Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. When he was brought before, Prabhupada was brought before Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur by Atul Ananda Das Brahmachari, who was the head of the Rupa Gaudiya Mott. So this Triveni is a very important holy place. Triveni Prayag, a very important holy place, wherein Ganga, Jamuna and Saraswati Sangam. Ganga, Jamuna, Saraswati Sangam. So as they were crossing on the boat, seeing the blackish color of the Ganga, Jamuna, Sangam, Mahaprabhu became overwhelmed with love of God. And in the boat, he's rocking. He's unable to control himself. He jumps into the water. Sort of like traveling with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He jumps into the water. Out of ecstasy, he jumps into the Ganga. And somehow or other they're able to catch him and to pull him back into the boat. But still he's out of control and dancing and chanting and just seeing the blackish color of the Ganga Jamuna. Somehow or other they managed to reach the other side before the boat had completely sunk. And then they, at the house of Ballabhacharya, Ballabhacharya and his family, they cooked and they offered prasadam to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. First they worshipped him, washed his lotus feet and sprinkled that water all over the family members, so the Paduka Charanamrita, which had washed the lotus feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They worshipped him with great pomp, with incense, with agarbatti, with flowers, lamps. And then, actually, Ballabhacharya, he requested Balabhadra Bhattacharya to cook. Mahaprabhu's personal assistant, he requested him to cook. And then they offered Chaitanya Mahaprabhu prasadam, and the remnants of that prasadam were offered to Rupa and Sanatan, while Ballabhacharya massaged the lotus feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Massaged his legs and lotus feet after taking prasadam. So then, after that wonderful incident when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu bestowed his mercy upon Ballabhacharya and accepted prasadam in his home, then they returned to the other side of Ma Ganga. And finally, we're coming to the beginning of the beginning of Rupa Shiksha. And so seeing the crowds, seeing the huge crowds that were there in Prayag, they decided to go to a quieter place, not in the main area, a quieter place, and to begin the discussion. Log bir bhoye Prabhu dashashvamed Jaya, log bir bhoye, the crowd, afraid of the crowd actually, it's bhoya. Because of the great crowds, from fear of the great crowds, Dashashvameda Jai, they went to Dashashvameda Ghat, Rupa Goshai Shika Karan Shakti Shanchariya. And there Chaitanya Mahaprabhu empowered Rupa Goswami in the philosophy of devotional service. Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, Rasha Tattva Pranto, Shab Shikailo Prabhu, Bhagavat Siddhanto. Krishna Tattva, the science of Krishna. Krishna Tattva means the Bhagavat Tattva, means the science of Godhead. What is the nature of God? What is the form of God? What is the activities of God? What is the position of God? How God is different from how the living entity is different from God? How the living entity is the same as God and different from God? It's called Krishna Tattva, the science of Godhead. Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva. Bhakti Tattva is the process of devotional service. Bhakti Tattva, the process of devotional service. Bhagavad Bhakti, Sadhana Bhakti, Sadhana Bhakti. Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, Rasa Tattva. Rasa Tattva means the flavors of love of Godhead. Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, Rasa Tattva means Shambandha Abhideya Prayojan. Krishna Tattva is the Sambandha. What is Krishna? Who are we? What is our relationship with Krishna? What is our relationship with the material energy? What is Krishna's relationship with the material energy? That's called Krishna Tattva. That's called Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha means relationship. So what is our relationship with the Supreme? What is our relationship with the material energy? What is Krishna's relationship with the material energy? That's called Sambandha Gyan, here Krishna Tattva. And Bhakti Tattva means the Abhideya Gyan, the process of Bhagavad Bhakti. These topics, Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, Rasa Tattva, Pranto means the end, Anto means as far as you can go. In the science of Krishna, in teaching the process of devotional service, and in the mellows of loving Godhead, completely described. Now actually these three topics, Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, Rasa Tattva, Pranto, they are described both in the Rupa Shiksha and in the Sanatana Shiksha. Because in the Rupa Shiksha we'll see Krishna Tattva described in some degree, and in the Sanatana Shiksha we'll see the Bhakti Tattva, the process of devotional service, described completely, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu describes to Sanatana Goswami Choishati Sadhananga, the 64 items of sadhana bhakti, wherein the 5 items are particularly predominant. That's all described in Sanatana Shiksha. And particularly Rasa Tattva, the mellows, the description of the mellows of love of Godhead are described to Rupa Goswami. And for that reason, Rupa Goswami is called the Rasa Acharya. Rasa Acharya, the Acharya in the science of the mellows of loving Krishna, which are described so wonderfully in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So Krishna Tattva, Bhakti Tattva, Rasa Tattva, Pranta, Shab Shikailo Prabhu, Bhagavat Shidanto, the conclusion of the Bhagavatam. So Srimad Bhagavatam is 12 cantos, and it will take some significant period for you to completely study and understand the conclusions of the Srimad Bhagavatam. However, for our convenience, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is summarizing the entirety of Srimad Bhagavatam in one chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Shab Shikailo Prabhu. He taught everything completely. Bhagavat Shidanto. The conclusions of Srimad Bhagavatam, which are described in 12 cantos, are described, are summarized and described to Rupa Goswami in one chapter of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we should study these teachings very thoroughly. All the conclusions, Prabhupada comments, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught all the conclusions he had heard from Ramananda Roy and duly empowered Srila Rupa Goswami so he could understand them. Prabhupada's commenting here how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he selected Rupa Goswami to be the recipient Prem Sharup. There's a Prem Shagor, Prem Sharup. Rupa Goswami is his name is Prem Sharup, Rupa Goswami. He's described as a manifestation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's love of Godhead. Srila Rupa Goswami, Prem Sharup, a manifestation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's love of Godhead, embodiment in the form of Srila Rupa Goswami. And Prabhupada's commenting that it's significant that Srila Prabhupada has selected Srila Rupa Goswami to be this recipient of his mercy, considering that Srila Rupa Goswami was, practically speaking, in a fallen condition, being entangled in the government service of the Mughals of Bengal, and being in the government and a householder. Prabhupada saying that a government officer and a grihasta. A government officer and a grihasta. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had so many exalted renunciate disciples and sannyasi disciples. Damodar, Sarup Damodar, sannyasi, so many, Brahmananda Bharati, Paramananda Puri, so many exalted sannyasi disciples. Gadada Pandit, brahmachari disciples. But he selects Rupa Goswami, a grihastha who was engaged who was employed. Employed. In other words, employment means a Brahmin can never take employment. A Brahmin cannot get a job. Immediately he's no longer considered a Brahmin. A Brahmin means yadricha lavashantushta. He's satisfied with whatever comes and he's busily engaged in educating people in the teachings of Krishna consciousness. That is Brahmin. Patan, yajan, dana pratigyaha. The duties of a Brahmin. That's a Brahmin. Not that he's working in a business or working as an employee. But Prabhupada, Mahaprabhu selected such a person in order to become and Rupa Goswami is our principal acharya. We're called Rupa Anugas, our principal teacher. Because Prabhupada's commenting that his association with Rupa Goswami, he was not even a brahmachari or a sannyasi. He associated with Malechas and Javans, but because he was eager to serve, he was a qualified recipient of the Lord's mercy. A sincere devotee can therefore be empowered by the Lord regardless of his situation. As soon as one is favored by the mercy of the spiritual master and the Lord, one is immediately given all the power necessary to write books and propagate the Krishna consciousness movement without being hampered by material considerations. In other words, the only qualification is one's desire. If one wants to give one's life to becoming a servant of Srila Prabhupada and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and giving one's contributing, surrendering one's life to contribute to the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then one can become fully empowered by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and become an emissary of his mercy. Anyone, regardless of one's situation. All that is required is one's desire. Or what to speak of those who are in the renounced order of Lord, the brahmacharis and the sannyasis, such a facility. The brahmachari life is such a facility. Actually, you can completely forget eating and sleeping and maintaining your body. The temple will manage everything for you. That's what brahmachari life means. You can just forget about eating and sleeping. You don't even have to endeavor. You don't come to prasadam once, that's acceptable. And then the next breakfast, okay, no one sees you at breakfast. No. And then at lunchtime we'll see Prabhu. And you don't come to lunch, then the devotees will be knocking on your door. Prabhu, take some prasadam. Is it not? Is it not? You cannot. You don't need to worry. You don't need to worry. And you can find asleep. I see these. You turn the fan on, and so many here and there they're sleeping. So that's it. Your clothes, everything. Occasionally you can take trips to Vrindavan, Mayapur. Navadip, Brahmiti, Jai Pode Pode Pai. You come to Mayapur, you walk around, Jai Pode Pode Pai. Every step, Koti Ashvamedha Paul. Sava Shastra guy, you get the millions of Ashvamedha Yagyas just by walking around Mayapur. So much facility is given in the brahmachari. It's such a fortune to be able to brahmachari. So easy for you to give your life to the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Give your life to Srila Prabhupada. Brahmachari Guru Kule Darshan Bantu Guru Hitan. You give your life for the pleasure of Guru. And that way your returning to the supreme abode is guaranteed. Is guaranteed. We're already in the spiritual world. You're already attained. You've already given up the material world. So where will you go when you give up this body? Brahmachari life, sannyasi life. This is perfect. How fortunate you are. I'm honored to come to ISKCON Hyderabad Attapur Center to be able to associate with such exalted Vaishnavas who have given their lives for the mission of Guru and Srila Prabhupada and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It is my honor to be able to take your association. So now, Kaviraj Goswami, after this initial meeting and this introduction to what is the Rupa Shiksha, is everything in the Srimad Bhagavatam, is the complete science of Godhead, explained in a very succinct way. and Mahaprabhu is specifically desiring to empower Rupa Goswami. That's why he went to Ramkeli. Why he went there, to retrieve them. To retrieve his eternal associates who had become entangled in the government, in the materialistic, to go and retrieve them. And just by seeing them, he placed his lotus feet on their heads. They received the blessings of the Vaishnavas. Very quickly they were delivered, and they were able to revive their position as being completely absorbed and fixed up in his devotional service. So after establishing the Mahaprabhu's purpose in going to Ramkeli and then again meeting in Prayag, now Kaviraj Goswami, he projects further. He projects what happens later. We'll hear subsequently Mahaprabhu orders Rupa and Sanatan to go to Vrindavan. Hey Chai Goshai, Jabe Braja Koila Bash, Radha Krishna Nitto Lila, Korila Prakash. Jabe Braja Koila Bash, go and reside in Vrindavan, Radha Krishna Nitto Lila, Korila Prakash. And through writing the Bhakti Shastras and through establishing the temples and the Tirthashthan, the places where Krishna performed his transcendental leelas in Vrindavan, these places that we visit in Vrindavan, they're all been identified, revived and developed by the Goswamis of Vrindavan. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's desire that Vrindavan again be, as we read in the opening verse, the glories of Vrindavan be revived. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did this through the Goswamis. Therefore we honor them with the title the six Goswamis of Vrindavan. So they went to Vrindavan and they were residing in Vrindavan, and their activities in Vrindavan were extraordinary. And now Kaviraj Goswami, he's projecting forward and he's describing what happened after this incident when Mahaprabhu is instructing Rupa Goswami. After that, Rupa Goswami goes to Vrindavan, he's residing there. And devotees from Bengal, they would go to Vrindavan. And then upon returning to Bengal, the Gaudiya Bhaktagon, they would inquire, how are Rupa and Sanatan living in Vrindavan? What are their activities? What are they doing? And these fortunate Gaudiya Vaishnavas who went to Vrindavan and returned to Bengal, they would describe the activities of Rupa and Sanatan. And Kaviraj Goswami, he's describing what they would say. Kehu Jodi Deshe Joy, Deke Vrindavan. Anyone would go from Bengal and go and see Vrindavan. Ta Prashna Koren Prabhu Parishad Gon. Mahaprabhu's devotees, they would inquire from them. How are Rupa and Sanatan doing in Vrindavan? What are their activities? What do they eat? How are they engaged in devotional service 24 hours a day? And those fortunate souls who had seen Rupa and Sanatan in Vrindavan, they would describe, Aniket Duhei, Bone Joto Brikagon, Ek Ek Brike Tole, Ek Ek Ratra Shayon. Without a residence, Aniket, Duhe, these two. Bone Joto Brikagon, as many trees there are in the forest, Ek Ek Brike Tole, Ek Ek Ratra Shayon. They would reside at the roots of one tree and every night, and then next night go to another tree. They had no residence. This is their residence. Bipra Grihe, Shtul Bika, Kahan Madhukari. They would maintain themselves by taking a little alms from the houses of Brahmins, Shukkaruti Chaya Chiboy Bhoga Parihari. They would subsist off simply dry chapatis and chickpeas. Dry chapatis and chickpeas. And they would lie down under the trees at night and sleep. Bhoga parihari. They gave up the enjoyment of eating. Just imagine imagine if we had to eat like that. Wouldn't be a temple room full of men here today. Everything we can, everything is renunciation. But prasadam, in prasadam, that's the only sense enjoyment, actually. Of course, there's dancing, kirtan, agurabati, but prasadam. But they gave up the enjoyment of pleasure eating. They gave up material enjoyment entirely. Karana matrahate, with a water pot in their hand. Kanta chida bahiravas, with one cloth. Chida, torn cloth. Bahiravas. Krishna kota Krishna nam nartan ulash. Krishna kota, discussing Krishna. Krishna nam, chanting the holy name of Krishna. Nartan ulas, dancing in great jubilation. So renounced in their life. Actually, you see the pictures of the Goswamis. They're trembling, emaciated forms, weak, hardly eating, eating a little, sometimes not eating at all, eating an hour and a half. Ashtaparaha, Krishna bhajan, chari danda shayon. So Ashtaparaha means 24 hours they're engaged in the service of the Lord. Chari danda shayon. So chari danda means an hour and a half. What is it? 40 minutes? Around about 40 minutes. 40 minutes. So 4 dandas is 1.5 hours. They would lie down, they would sleep 1.5 hours. Some days they wouldn't eat at all, because they're completely absorbed in chanting the holy name, in discussing Krishna, in writing the Bhakti Shastras, in paying obeisances, and in dancing. Okay. So it's not that they became so weak they just lie around. Sometimes the Kodashi Nirjala Kodasi, I'll do Nirjala Kodasi, half the day you're just lying down. Well, one time I remember doing Nirjala Kodasi. Next morning to worship the deity, I had to crawl. I had to crawl around and to gather the ingredients. I'm so exhausted. The Goswamis said some days not eating at all, but Nartana Ulash, they're dancing in great ecstasy and doing Govardhan Parikrama, are full of energy, a spiritual energy. Kabu Bhakti Ras Shastra Karya Likon. Sometimes they're writing the Bhakti Ras Shastras. Chaitanya Kota Shune, Kove Chaitanya Chinton. Sometimes discussing about Lord Chaitanya Kota Shune, Chaitanya Chinton. Sometimes just thinking. Sometimes just meditating on. Sometimes just contemplating on the greatness of the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this way they spent their time. Prabhupada's commenting that because they focused their entire energy on writing the Bhakti Shastras. That's the purpose of them being there, to write the Bhakti Shastras, the Goswami Grantha, from which a whole movement is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, everything we know about Vrindavan, about Bhagavad Bhakti, Sadhana Bhakti, so important. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself wasn't writing books. He wasn't writing books because he was overwhelmed in love of Godhead. The messenger came to give him the message. He couldn't even talk to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's relishing the Bhakti Rush. So he's not organizing a preaching mission. He's empowering Rupa Goswami and Sanatana Goswami to develop the whole curriculum of his ideology in a systematic Nana Shashta Bicharanaika Nipana Satdama Shangstapako, to establish the conclusions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings with reference to all the authorized scriptures. Prabhupada's commenting that Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's opinion was that he told his disciples to write books. He preferred to publish books rather than establish temples. Temple construction is meant for the general populace and neophyte devotees. The business of advanced and empowered devotees is to write books, publish them, and distribute them widely. According to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, distributing literature is like playing on the great mridanga. Consequently, we always request members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness to publish as many books as possible. to publish as many books as possible and distribute them widely throughout the world. By thus following in the footsteps of Srila Rupa Goswami, one can become a Rupanuga devotee. So in this way, Kaviraj Goswami, he, in this very poetically, very beautifully, glorifies the Goswamis and their activities in Vrindavan. And then he carries on to describe more detail of the instructions Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives to Rupa Goswami, which we will further describe at 11 o'clock this morning. Are there any questions on the topics discussed this morning? Yes.
Prabhuji, my question is from last evening, yesterday's. So, you were describing that how Sanatana Goswami advised Chaitanya Mahaprabhu not to go to Vrindavan along with the crowd. So, one another time also we hear that Jagannathan Pandit also advised Sanatana Goswami to go to Vrindavan. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took it as a Maryada Bhatikram. However, he accepted this as a service. So, how do we understand this?
Who say it again? That someone requested Sanatana Goswami to go to Vrindavan?
Jagdanand Pandit.
Yeah. So your question is?
So how do we understand this? He also advised, Jagdanand Pandit also advised Sanatana Goswami, but that was a Maryada Bhatikram.
Well, it happens that the instruction was the same. The instruction was the same that Jagadananda Pandit gave to Sanatana Goswami. The instruction was the same. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't appreciate that Jagadananda Pandit, who was junior to Sanatana Goswami, was instructing him, even though the instruction was correct. Even though the instruction was correct, it was a breach of etiquette because he shouldn't have assumed the position of the instructor to a senior Vaishnava. So the mistake there was that he's assuming the position of instructor. The mistake wasn't the actual instruction that was given.
There Sanatana Goswami was like, he also suggested to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu not to go to Vrindavan along with so much of crowd. In Ramkeli, so there Mahaprabhu accepted it as advice.
Well, we were discussing that was extraordinary. It was extraordinary. We were discussing that was extraordinary. It's extraordinary. But he was doing it out of his service. Vaishnave kriya mudda vigyate na bujaya. It's not easy to understand the activities of a great and interactions of a great Vaishnava. Not easy. Anyway, we hear, and by hearing we're purified. Anything else today? Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Shishi Nidai Gaur, Chaitanya Pramanandi, Hari Hari Bol.